Welcome back, everyone. I'm Carrie Johnson of Starcrow Astrology, and I'm making this video today to talk about one of the things that I've really had fun studying so far in 2024, and that's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction cycle. So, of course, Jupiter conjoined Uranus at 21 degrees of Taurus back on April 20th of 2024. And we're in the middle of June now, and Jupiter is starting to move out of influence of that conjunction. The two planets are now 10 degrees apart. They're split by sign, of course. Jupiter moved into Gemini back in May of 2024. So being split by sign, it weakens the conjunction, but they are still within 10 degrees of each other. So we're still under the influence of this conjunction. And if we want to understand the lasting historical impact of any planetary combinations, and if we want to predict what will happen under any planetary combination, what we do is we go back as astrologers and we study the history of what has happened under previous cycles of those planets, right? So Jupiter conjoins Uranus every 14 years. It's a 14-year cycle. And I personally went all the way back to 1914 and studied all the cycles from the last 110 years. So these two planets, what I personally see when I look at the combination of Jupiter-Uranus is a progressive corruption story. Jupiter, of course, correlates to rulers and the ruling class. It's the king, it's the queen, it's the president, it's the government, right? It's the ruler. And Uranus is many wonderful things. Uranus is technological innovation. Uranus is wildly populist. It's humanitarian, futuristic. It's all of those things. Uranus is also sociopathology. If we want to look at extreme dysfunctional Uranus, Uranus is a sociopath. So it's violence for the sake of violence, right? With Uranus. And personally, and criminality, Uranus correlates to criminality. So with the combination of these two planets, there's a lot of potentiality with the two planets coming together. Personally, when I study the history, I see a progressive corruption story. And I have a pet name. I've got a pet name for this conjunction, this zodiac cycle. I like to refer to it as lies and lying liars. And I have another one. Lies my government told me. That's really what I see under the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction cycle. So these two planets, as astrologers were analyzing the previous cycles of Jupiter and Uranus, a lot was made of the years 1968 and 1969 because these two planets conjoined in 68 and 69, and those years were just jam-packed with historically relevant events, right? But what I heard my fellow astrologers doing as they analyzed those events was I heard them repeating what the public was told at the time. And those stories do not hold up all of these years later in 2024. So I'm going to talk about 68 and 69. Specifically, the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, the Apollo moon landing, and the Manson murders. And give an alternative perspective on all of those events, because, really the way that we do history matters as astrologers. If we are repeating garbage narratives, we're not really going to understand what the combination of these two planets is about. We're only going to get the right answer if we have a clear lens for analyzing the past cycles, right, that have happened under the two planets. So I've got a larger point here. It's just that we have to have a clear lens when we do the historical stuff if we want to understand what the cycle of any two planets is about. So before we get into it, I want to let you know that registration for my next 13-month astrology apprenticeship program is available. It's open now. on my website. It's starcrow.com. So my apprenticeship, it will take you all the way from learning the narrative elements of astrology, or how to tell a good astrological story, right? That's what we do in module 1. In module 2, I teach chart synthesis. So that's just looking at a chart and being able to find the narrative arc, being able to figure out what the whole chart is saying. And of course, the method for doing that is nodal analysis. So that's what I teach in module 2. And module 3 takes a look at transits and synastry. Transits, of course, is understanding the way that the current astrological alignments are impacting someone's natal chart, so that we can anticipate what will happen, both the assets and liabilities that a person is experiencing during any given period of time. And synastry, of course, is relationship astrology. So transits and synastry are kind of the same skill with 2 different applications, and I teach those in module 3. So if you want more information, you can check out my courses at starcrow.com. And if you have questions, email me at cj@starcrow.com. Okay, so 1968 and 1969. 1968 and 69. So we're going to start with the King assassination. And part of the reason I have been sitting on this content for most of the year is that the King assassination, really all of these stories, are so convoluted, and they're so convoluted that they're hard to explain, because what the public was told is so absolutely ridiculous. So what the public was told about the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination is that James Earl Ray was an escaped convict. He had escaped from jail. He was racist. He shot Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, 1968, as King stepped out onto the balcony of the hotel that he was staying in Memphis, Tennessee. James Earl Ray was in an adjacent hotel room and shot King over out of a window, and killed him. And a gun was found in the hotel where James Earl Ray was staying, that was traced back to an alias that James Earl Ray was using at the time. James Earl Ray fled the area in a white convertible, like the most conspicuous car he could possibly drive. And there was, police were looking for this man in a white convertible. I've gone back and looked at some of the news footage. At the time, it is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so they finally find him. He has a fake ID. He's trying to leave the country. They find him, they arrest him. He pleads guilty. He's convicted, essentially. So the story is so sketchy, y'all. So what the facts really say? So James Earl Ray, if we look at him first, he had escaped from a Missouri prison prior to the assassination. And someone who he crawled into the back of a bread truck and escaped from prison. So we do know who drove the bread truck, because his son was also in the car. So a man by the name of Russell Atkins Sr. was actually driving the bread truck that James Earl Ray climbed into and escaped from prison. So according to Russell Atkins Jr.'s son, the Dixie Mafia had found James Earl Ray and identified him as easy to manipulate. And they thought that he would be a good fall guy, or a good kind of, a good patsy to be blamed, essentially, for this murder. And he's set up from the time that he escapes jail in this bread truck that was driven by Russell Atkins Sr. So according to researchers, William Pepper in particular, he was identified by the Dixie Mafia, and it goes straight back to J. Edgar Hoover was looking for someone to do this job. He's the head of the FBI at the time. J. Edgar Hoover really had it in for MLK. He is quoted by many people who worked for him as saying the United States can never have a Black Messiah. So deeply racist. He had a personal vendetta against MLK. And his boyfriend, Clyde Tolson, worked with the Dixie Mafia to identify James Earl Ray as easy to manipulate, an unwitting kind of fall guy, and they proceed to break him out of jail and set him up for this murder. So, according to James Earl Ray, once he escaped prison, he was approached by essentially a handler. He said that this guy's name was Raul Quelu, right? So Raul tells James Earl Ray that he's a criminal, he's a gun runner, right? And he asks James Earl Ray essentially to work for him in this gun smuggling operation. So that's what James Earl Ray thinks he's doing. He thinks that he is working for this guy, Raul, and that he's involved in a gun smuggling operation while he is out on the lam, right? So it's really important to go back to this gun that was purchased by James Earl Ray. But he said he purchased the gun at the direction of Raul, right? The gun that was found after the King assassination. So there was a shooter's nest. Where have we heard that one before? Where have we heard this before? So after the assassination, investigators find this shooter's nest that has this gun in it, and some unopened cans of beer, some bobby pins, the essentials that you need if you're going to pull off an assassination. And it's found in the hotel, right? So James Earl Ray did purchase that gun with a fake ID that he says Raul provided him with, right? So he's an escaped convict. Where is he getting these fake IDs? Where is he getting the money to purchase the gun? He also purchased the white convertible at the direction of Raul with money that Raul provided him with, right? So it appears that he has a handler while he is out of jail. And it's really significant here to mention, so that gun is now in the Civil Rights Museum. And we know now that that is not the gun that was used to assassinate King, as the public was told. And we know that it isn't the gun because of forensic analysis. It has to do with the turn rate of the bullet did not match the wounds sustained by King. One of the things that really gets me in this story, the thing that really does it for me, is the bushes. So people who witnessed the crime, witnessed the assassination, said that the gunshots did not come from the room that James Earl Ray was supposedly in. They came from the bushes that were kind of underneath the room where James Earl Ray was that he supposedly shot from. They came from the bushes outside of the room. And in fact, that window where he supposedly shot King out of, it was covered by these bushes. So overnight, someone came, some agency came and took all of those bushes out. They were gone by the next morning, right? King is shot in the evening. Those bushes are removed overnight. And one of the people who said that the shots came from the bushes was King's own chauffeur, right? So the bushes are gone by the next morning. The gun does not match the injuries sustained by King. And James Earl Ray claimed that he was at a gas station nearby the hotel where King was killed, changing a tire on the white convertible. So he hears the commotion. He flees the area. Everybody's looking for this man in a white convertible. He is later picked up with another fake ID while he is trying to flee the country at an airport. And he does plead guilty. but it's kind of guilty with an asterisk. It's this certain plea deal that that you can plea, but it's like I'm pleading guilty. I'm not really guilty, but I think that I will get a lighter sentence or a better sentence if I plead guilty. So I'm doing that because it's in my best interest. So he gives this plea, right? And he was pressured into it by his attorney at the time. So James Earl Ray really did not get fair representation. There really was not an investigation into the murder because he pled guilty. And essentially, his attorney at the time pressured him into making this plea, blackmailed him even. James Earl Ray needed assistance for his brother. They were trying to implicate his brother as having colluded with the crime, and James Earl Ray really needed help to get his brother, I think, money so that he could defend himself. And his attorney said, "Sure, I'll give your brother that $500 if you plead guilty." So he's kind of blackmailed into making this plea. But he said he maintained for the rest of his life that he did not commit this crime. So what else is important to say? Let me think. I'm forgetting something. So I'm going to show you. Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you the chart for King's death. Share screen. Here we go. All right. I'm going to show you the chart for King's death. Let me see. This is King's death. So one important thing that I would point out is that this is not a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So we have Jupiter here at 26 of Leo, and Uranus is at 26 of Virgo. So this is April 4th, 1968. Jupiter does not properly conjoin Uranus until December of 68. I would not throw this out of the data set. However, I would just say that this is a closing semi-sextile. So this is a closing out of the previous conjunction cycle. And I get real curious when I see this as to how this event might connect back to what happened during the previous conjunction, because we're closing out that cycle. We're about to start a new cycle as Jupiter conjoins Uranus in December of 68. So the previous conjunction cycle happened in 54, and significantly, that was when the Geneva Accords happened. So the Geneva Accords, that was when Vietnam split, and we have North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And of course, the United States immediately pledged support for South Vietnam because we never saw a war we didn't like. We got to get in on it. So we immediately pledged support for South Vietnam in 54 after the Geneva Accords. And of course, by 68 and 69, or 68 when this happens, we're fully involved in Vietnam, right? So the point I'm making here is that King changed his message in 1967, and it was actually April 4th of 1967, a year to the day of his assassination. King made this speech. It was called Beyond Vietnam, and it was essentially a sermon that he preached in New York, where he linked America's wars abroad with poverty at home. And he starts to really go after the entire establishment. And he really starts to call out the military-industrial complex, and he starts preaching this universal message of all people uniting around their shared economic interests. So I just want to point that out because it's really important. It's really important. You can talk about race in the United States. We can talk about all of the isms except classism. And classism has intentionally been eradicated really from the American consciousness. We don't have a strong class consciousness in this country. But when you get into dealing with class, you've got a unity you've got a very powerful unity message, right? So King pivots. There was even talk prior to his death of starting a poor people's party with MLK as the head of that party, right? As a third party. And when he was assassinated, he was planning the Poor People's March on Washington. So, and that did happen in the summer of 68. So he was dead at that point, but the Poor People's March on Washington did happen. It was kind of a disaster. It rained the whole time. King was dead. Bobby Kennedy is also killed 2 months later. We really see the death of the movement. So what else would I say? Another really important thing to point out is I mentioned J. Edgar Hoover. I mentioned J. Edgar Hoover earlier. It's really important to note that J. Edgar Hoover had this personal kind of vendetta against MLK. And the FBI at this time had a program. It was called COINTELPRO. That was the FBI's program that infiltrated all dissident groups and spied on them and attempted to discredit dissident groups. So King was just bugged. Everything was bugged. And in fact, the Southern Leadership Committee, which King was the head of, they used to go out into the middle of fields to plan their operations because absolutely everything was bugged. They only knew that they would be speaking privately if they were out in the middle of a field somewhere, right? So they were just so spied on, so bugged, and the FBI had incriminating evidence on King. Essentially, MLK had a lot of illicit affairs. And in the months prior to his death, he was receiving phone calls and letters saying, King, you are a fake. You are a phony and a fake. We have this incriminating evidence on you that we are going to release to the press. And they were essentially trying to say, you should just do the right thing. You should just do the thing. The FBI was essentially harassing him with this blackmail, basically, and threatening to release this stuff to the public if he didn't kill himself. And those phone calls and letters have been traced back to the head of the COINTELPRO program at the FBI. So that's a really important thing to note here too. So just notice, and I'm not going to analyze this whole chart, but we have Jupiter applying, it's a semi-sextile. We've got it 30 degrees out. Jupiter is going to come up and conjoin Uranus in December of 1968 for the first time. I want to show you one other thing. So this is MLK's chart that we're looking at now. And the eighth house, of course, is the house of death. So if we want to look in King's chart, his natal chart, and analyze his death, what we would do is analyze the eighth house and the planetary rulers of the eighth house. So the eighth house, of course, is ruled by Pluto and Mars. So here's Pluto, here's Mars. So these two planets described by sign, by house, by aspect, King's death. And the other planet that's relevant, of course, is Jupiter, because King has Sag on his eighth house cusp. So in addition to Pluto and Mars, King's eighth house of death is also ruled by the planet Jupiter. And we have Saturn in the eighth house, and I'll speak to that in a second. But just look at what happens when we pull MLK's chart against J. Edgar Hoover's chart. So I'm looking at their synastry now, and I just want, so on the inside in blue, that's King's chart. On the outside in red, that's J. Edgar Hoover. And I just want to note, Jupiter, of course, plays into King's death, and J. Edgar Hoover's Mars is right on top of King's Jupiter. So Mars is the planet of action, right? Aggression, it's the god of war. It's the planet, it's the doing in the chart. So interesting. J. Edgar Hoover's Mars is on top of King's Jupiter. We don't have an aspect to King's Mars via Hoover's chart, but check out Pluto. This is King's Pluto opposed by Hoover's Venus. So Venus, of course, is one's desires. So J. Edgar Hoover's desire is opposed King's Pluto, King's literal planet of death. What else? And then Uranus. Uranus is like a bomb going off. J. Edgar Hoover's Uranus is trine King's Pluto. J. Edgar Hoover's Uranus is trine also King's Moon. And that's a good one for the harassment and irritation, constant irritation that King and the Southern Leadership Committee experienced at the hand of the FBI prior to his death. So, and trines are they combine easily, right? So it's like he's got this hornet after him, constantly shaking up his moon, his heart. It's like just no rest. What's the other thing that I wanted to point out? There's one more thing. It's King's Saturn is square J. Edgar Hoover's nodes. That's really interesting too. Oh, and J. Edgar Hoover's Jupiter opposes King Saturn, which of course is in his 8th house of death. Jupiter in Hoover's chart, we can read that as him as an administrator. Him as the head of his very powerful branch of, well, it's not a branch of government, his very powerful, head of the FBI. That's his Jupiter. It's also overreach, over expansion. We get into Jupiter problems when we go too far, right? And he's got his Jupiter, Hoover's Jupiter is opposed King Saturn. Now, I want to say one other thing, Saturn in his 8th house of death. So the planets in the 8th house, they're going to describe King's death. And I just want to point out here that there is a witness that King biographer William Pepper talks about this nurse who claimed that King did not die of his gunshots. So he went to the hospital. He was alive when he went to the hospital. And this nurse tells the story that she was in the room with other medical staff working on him when a neurologist came in with 2 men in black suits. And the neurologist cleared the room of the medical staff and said, quit working on that racial explicative, or quit trying to save that racial explicative, cleared the room, and the nurse stood outside of the room and heard the men slurp up water and spit on MLK as he lay, wounded in the bed. And then they proceeded to smother him. So she claimed that he died of suffocation. Now, Saturn happens to be the planetary ruler of suffocation. So I just find that interesting. So that's the King chart. So it's a very different story than what the public was told, right? So if it was never really investigated, but the claim that that James Earl Ray acted alone, it just doesn't seem to stand up. How did he get out of jail? How did he have money to buy a car and a gun? Where did the fake IDs come from? He claimed that he was being directed and he had this handler, and he thought that he was involved in a gun smuggling operation, and he was essentially framed for the murder. And it is also important to mention that a man named Lloyd Jowers came forward in the 90s and claimed that he had worked with the Memphis Police Department and unnamed officials inside the US government to pull off this murder. So he inspired with the Memphis Police Department and unnamed people inside of the federal government to put this assassination together. Lloyd Jowers owned a restaurant that was near the hotel where King was assassinated. So he came forward in the 90s and claimed that he was a part of this conspiracy to kill King. And he was actually sued by the King family and found guilty of having conspired to kill King. And there were unnamed officials inside of the government in that lawsuit were also, they weren't named, they're unnamed officials, but they were found guilty in this civil case in the 90s. So that's another important detail. So if we look at 68 and 69 and what happened with King's assassination under the Jupiter Uranus conjunction, and we say, oh, extreme acts of violence, right? Uranus correlates to violence. Jupiter magnifies the violence, it makes it bigger, and we have this lone gunman, this assassination that happened at the hand of a lone gunman. We don't have the story right. I would really interpret this one as a, it's a corruption story / lies my government told me. So next up, we've got Bobby Kennedy. I'm going to stop my share here for a minute. So next up, we have Bobby Kennedy. And for those of you, oh, and by the way, Bobby and King were friends. Bobby Kennedy actually spoke and gave a eulogy at King's funeral. And then 2 months later, he was assassinated on June 6th of 1968. So at this time, Bobby Kennedy was running for president, and it was the primary season, of course, summertime. And he was in California when he was killed. He had just accepted the nomination for the Democratic ticket, right, for California. He won his primary. And he had just given his acceptance speech at a hotel in Los Angeles, and he stepped off of the stage and walked through the kitchen at this hotel. He was making his way to the party, right, after the conference. So what the public was told is that he was shot in the kitchen, and this was televised. Yeah, there's a lot of video footage of this. But he was shot in the kitchen by this crazy man. Again, we have a crazy man, a lone gunman named Sirhan, right? And Sirhan is found guilty. He's still alive. He's still in jail. So the problem with this story, as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says, the problem is that Sirhan, so he did have a gun. He was holding an 8-round gun, but 13 bullets were found in the kitchen. So as RFK Jr. says, you cannot get 13 bullets out of an 8-round gun. So there's our problem. The other issue is that Bobby Kennedy was shot at point blank range in his side and in the back of his head. And Sirhan was standing in front of Bobby. Now, he did have a gun. He did fire all of his shots. We know where his bullets went. He did shoot people. He didn't kill anyone. And Sirhan has always claimed that he has no memory whatsoever of this event. All he remembers is the lady in the polka dot dress. He remembers a lady in a polka dot dress. That's all he remembers. So after Bobby Kennedy was killed, the Los Angeles County coroner was absolutely determined that there would be no issues with the medical examination, simply because he didn't want to have another JFK situation. The JFK autopsy is it was so fishy. It was so fishy. And he did not want to have another autopsy of yet another Kennedy that didn't stand up to scrutiny. So what the coroner did was he called in all of the coroners for the various branches of government to witness his autopsy of Bobby Kennedy. And it's from that autopsy that we know he was shot at point blank range from the back of his head and from his side. So what RFK Jr. says, and if you want more information on this, you can just go to any interview where RFK Jr. talks about his father's assassination. RFK Jr. says that they do know who killed his father. It was a bodyguard who had been hired the day before. I have his name written down. I'm in my paper. It was a bodyguard who had been hired just the day before, and they did know when this guy was hired that Bobby would be at the hotel the next night. So they have an idea of, where he's going to be over the next 24 hours. The guy's name is Eugene Thane Caesar. So Eugene Thane Caesar had a full-time job. He worked security for Lockheed Martin. He had the highest level security clearance, and he had worked for another military contractor previously. And there are documents now, according to Bobby Kennedy, that where Eugene Thane Caesar was a CIA operative or a CIA agent by his own admission, right? So he was in the right spot to have fired those shots. And then there's funny stuff with Sirhan too. So remember, all he remembers is the lady with the polka dot dress. He sounds crazy. That just sounds, I don't remember anything. The lady with the polka dot dress. That sounds crazy unless you are aware that during this period of time, the CIA was running its notorious MK Ultra program. And what the CIA was doing, and it was very active in California and in LA County. And what the CIA was trying to do was create Manchurian candidates who would not remember, and assassins who would not remember the crimes that they committed. It was a brainwashing program. And Sirhan was in kind of the right place to have fallen victim. He just kind of fits the profile. He was involved with the Rosicrucians in LA. And of course, there's a Rosicrucian CIA connection. And Sirhan also saw a psychiatrist, kind of a shady psychiatrist in LA. And this is a very dark era for psychiatry. And he just kind of fits the bill, not remembering. And polka dots are often can be used to induce hypnotic states. And the people who after Sirhan shot his gun, he was wrestled to the ground by two of Bobby Kennedy's bodyguards. And he was a tiny little guy. He's a teeny tiny little guy. They could not get the gun out of his hand. So you can also induce muscle spasms, muscles to seize. Like he appeared to be in some kind of altered state of consciousness, according to the people who witnessed the event. So just for what it's worth, Sirhan appears to fit a profile of like exactly what the CIA was trying to create via the MK Ultra program during this period of time. And incidentally, the MK Ultra program was authorized in 1953, right? If we go back to the previous conjunction cycle, MK Ultra was authorized by Allen Dulles, head of the CIA, in 1953, but it really gets going like crazy in 1954. And remember, 54 is the previous conjunction cycle. So we don't really know how many sub-programs there were in the MK Ultra program, but there were hundreds. Most of the documents were destroyed in the 70s. There was a congressional investigation into MK Ultra. It was called I think the Church Committee, but most of the records were destroyed. But we do know that, for example, the notorious Operation Midnight Climax was started in 1954. And remember, that's the previous conjunction cycle. And just this program just really gets going in 54. So there's a connection with Jupiter Uranus. What you tend to see is an echo, right? During any conjunction cycle, you tend to see themes come back up from the previous conjunction, and there's kind of this ripple and this echo through the decades with this cycle. So with Bobby Kennedy's assassination, I'm going to share my screen. Let's look at Bobby Kennedy real quick. So we're still on MLK here. So here is RFK's death on June 6th of 68. And you can see that Jupiter is now at 28 degrees of Leo, applying conjunction to Uranus. Wow. Wow. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but of course, Jupiter and Uranus, that's the conjunction that really defines the 60s. Uranus is the planet of revolution. Pluto is the planet of evolution. And the 60s has become a euphemism, just the 60s has become a euphemism for this period of rapid revolution, evolution in the psyche of the people. So we got our two planets there, Jupiter and Uranus, in this closing semi-sextile. So next up, we're going to talk about something a little bit lighter, and that is the Apollo moon landing. So with this one, you guys, I do not understand why talking about the moon landing is such a third rail. Oh my gosh, you can talk about so many things. You can talk about so many things, so many things. But when we get into the moon landing, whoo, people get really mad about this one. People get so mad. I think there are kind of two kinds of people. There are people who, and you know what? Of course, like if you have never thought about the moon landing, it's not your fault. You were told that, astronauts went to the moon when you were a kid and you believed it because you were a kid. And then in adulthood, you've just never thought about it. So, I mean, I get it. I never thought about this either until 2 years ago. But there are the kind of people who immediately can look at the facts and be like, oh, my gosh, we didn't go to the moon. And then there are people who get really, really, really mad. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the Apollo moon landing. I mean, if you want to watch something great on this, watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which is currently available on YouTube. If they take it down from YouTube, try BitChute, try Rumble. But A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon is great. So, the moon landing, we've got to go back to 68 and 69. Or 69, because we're in the summer of 69 now. So this is Vietnam, right? And the country is morale in the country is extremely low. Vietnam is not going well. And Congress is not in the mood to spend a lot of money. We're starting to see some financial problems in the country. We're getting into the kind of stagflation period that we really get into in the 70s. But Congress is not in the mood to authorize any extra money for the War Department. So the Apollo mission, which had been going on, for most of the 60s at this point, it's a giant money laundering campaign. Once it becomes apparent that we cannot go to the moon, and the reason we cannot go to the moon is that there is a radiation belt, like the big reason, other than the fact that it's just a really long way away, you guys. It's like 239,000 miles. It's a really long way. But there's this radiation belt around the Earth that biological life cannot pass through because it's just this extreme belt of radiation. And in order for biological life to go through this radiation belt, it would need to be protected by 8 feet of iron. 8 feet of lead, 8 feet of solid lead. And of course, the rocket did not have an 8-foot barrier of lead, right? I mean, how could you have a rocket with that much lead in it? So that's why we know we can't pass through the Van Allen radiation belt. So essentially what happens is that as we figure out, and there are a lot of reasons we couldn't go to the moon, but as we start to figure that out, what we decided to do was fake it via Hollywood, right? If the United States is going to win the space race, We're not, we can do it via Hollywood. It's a whole lot cheaper to do it via Hollywood. So the urban legend, of course, is that Stanley Kubrick filmed the Apollo moon landing in the desert in Hollywood. And in trade for him filming the landing, he got to use NASA's awesome lenses when he filmed the movie 2001 A Space Odyssey, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. I love that movie. Um, so there are all kinds of problems with the Apollo photos, right? So a lot of people who talk about this get into the photos of the moon landing. The lighting is not right in the photos. It appears that they are lit from prop lights, like stage lights. So you have shadows that are just all wrong. Another anomaly is that there are no stars in the background of the photos. So when the astronauts came back, right, they did fly off into space. They hung out in space for a few days. We had been doing that. We had the technology to do that. They just didn't go to the moon. So when they came back, they told the press, oh, we didn't see any stars. So the thinking here is that it would be too hard to fake a backdrop of stars and get it right. So they said they didn't see any stars, right? So the photos have no stars in the background. My personal favorite part is that they got all the way there and back on one tank of gas. I just love that to no end. And you have President Nixon. You guys, if you have not seen this footage, it's really worth going back and looking at. So it's like a made for TV thing, you know, that they were doing. President Nixon, they're interrupting daytime TV. Nixon is on the phone in the Oval Office. And this is a phone that plugs into a wall, y'all. It plugs into a wall. And he's calling the moon on a landline, right? In 1969 with 1969 technology and talking to the astronauts. Oh, I love that one. Probably where we went wrong was ever putting a guy whose nickname was Tricky Dick in charge of the space program. That was probably one of the really big eras. And supposedly, I don't know if this is true or not, but Lyndon Johnson knew that they were going to try to fake the moon landing in 1969. And that's part of the reason he did not run for a second term of office. So I don't know if that's true, but it's a piece of the urban legend. So we have Nixon calling the astronauts, and it's not like the press was on the moon reporting, you know, doing investigative journalism. They were reporting what NASA was telling them. They were reporting what the government was telling them. Although there were whistleblowers at the time, people did doubt that this happened. There were some whistleblowers, some astronauts who blew the whistle who died in a fire in NASA. At NASA, 3 astronauts died in a fire when they were starting to talk about problems with the program. Another astronaut who talked to the press was killed. He and his family were hit by a train. Their car was on a train track and they died in this accident with a train. So there were whistleblowers. There were whistleblowers who died of mysterious circumstances. And there were always people who doubted. And the doubt of the moon landing was in popular culture. There was a James Bond movie that was released shortly after the moon landing, where James Bond runs through a set where they're faking the moon landing. O.J. Simpson was in a movie that's about a fake moon landing. And let me show you this. I'm going to share my screen again. This is going to be back in the zeitgeist this summer. There's a movie coming out called Fly Me to the Moon with Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum. And this is a movie about faking the moon landing. So this is going to be back in the zeitgeist this summer. I'm giving y'all a heads up. People are going to be talking about this again. So, and of course, this is something that is cited still and by my fellow astrologers, by my colleagues, as this amazing triumph of humankind, right? 1969, this thing happens. Here's the chart. So this is pulled for July 16th, 1969 at 12 p.m. And the mission flew out of Cape Canaveral, Florida. So you can see that the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is exact at 0 degrees of Libra. And let me tell you, study this chart, y'all. This chart, I do not trust this chart as far as I can throw it. Anytime you see this this is a grand trine, this big triangle. And this is actually called a kite because it has the addition of these sextiles, coming off of one of the sides. And you can see the kite formation. So when you see a chart like this, and it's the planets involved too, there is these blue lines, these sextiles and trines, they combine easily. And we can get into challenges with the easy combinations of the planets. And we have planets involved in this particular pattern that really correlate to lies and gaslighting. And I do not trust this chart as far as I can throw it. So the kite formation, it's absolutely perfect. It was kind of easy to pull this thing off. It was there was no internet. People weren't out researching it. We're so innocent. They trusted what the government told them. It was easy to get away with this thing, right? But check this out. You've got Neptune trine Mercury, and Neptune trine this Mercury Sun conjunction in Cancer. Neptune is the planet of lies and deception and smoke and mirrors and distortion. And when you get Neptune in combination with Mercury, that's the classic signature for gaslighting, someone being gaslit. So Mercury, of course, is thinking, perception, communication. And here's Neptune in trine with Mercury. So I'm flagging that. And the sun, of course, would be like the identity of the event itself. And you've got Neptune trine the sun, right? It's really hard to know what is going on with this event and with the perception of this event. So we've got major distortion here. And then also note that Neptune is conjunct Mars. Now it is split by sign. That weakens the conjunction, but it's still there. So Neptune, the planet of lies, the planet of distortion, the planet of gaslighting. Mars is like the rocket shooting off. It's like the journey to the moon. Mars is the planet of action. We do not know what is going on with the supposed mission, right? We don't know. Neptune is there, clouding the water. And then we also have Neptune Neptune is sextile Pluto and the South Node. Now, the South Node, we always want to consider the more challenged expression of whatever sign the South Node is in, because the South Node, it's not. It's like the least kind of functional spot in the chart. It's kind of describes some of the very challenged patterning that the chart is trying to express. And we have Pluto, the planet of absolute control, sitting on the South Node in this chart. And again, the sextile to Neptune. Personally, I do not trust this chart as far as I can throw it. In the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, Jupiter-Uranus, sextile Mars. So Jupiter and Uranus together, when this event is talked about in connection with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, what I have heard other astrologers talk about is the miracle that we went to the moon, right? And Jupiter is the ruler. Jupiter has to do with triumph. Uranus is technological innovation. Look at what happened under this conjunction in 1969. And we know that biological life cannot pass through the Van Allen radiation belt. We know that we didn't go to the moon. Oh, by the way, you guys watch that video. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon, and you will see people ask NASA personnel, NASA staff, NASA scientists, why have we not been back to the moon? And their answer, and it's lots and lots, there's so much footage of people asking it, like it's a lot of people, a lot of NASA scientists have been asked, why can't we go back? The answer is that we lost the plans for the lunar lander. We lost the plans. We cannot recreate the lunar lander because we lost the plans. We don't know how to build it anymore. And they also say we lost the trig. It takes a lot of trigonometry to figure out how to get to the moon. And we lost the math, and we can't do math again. These are the answers that they give. And there is also a lot of footage of NASA scientists making speeches saying, and we're doing this project so that one day we will be able to do, what do they call it? Deep orbit exploration or upper orbit exploration. Barack Obama even makes one of these statements when he's speaking at NASA. We're going to do this experiment so that one day we can do deep space exploration. Didn't we do it? Didn't we go to the moon? No, we didn't. We haven't done it yet because we can't get past the Van Allen radiation belt. So apparently we can't do math in 2024 like we could in 1969. So this chart, I love this chart, and astrologers often cite the moon landing as this triumph of humankind. I would read it differently. I would read it lies and lying liars, you guys. So last and finally, I want to talk about the Manson murders. So Charles Manson, of course, this is just these awful, awful murders that happened and shocked the consciousness of the United States in the summer of 1969, just a month after the Apollo moon landing, right? So, and the public was told, these people are in a cult. Charles, they're hippies, they're doing a lot of drugs, they're in a cult. They break into this mansion where the famous actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time, was staying. And I believe that they killed 5 people. So the important thing to know with the Manson murders, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that links Charles Manson to the notorious MK Ultra program that I mentioned previously when we talked about Sirhan. So with Charles Manson, he's kind of a petty criminal. He had spent a lot of time in prison. He was released in 1967, and he had spent, I believe, the previous decade in the Los Angeles federal prison system. And that particular prison system is where Jolly West, who was the head psychologist for the CIA, was conducting MK Ultra mind control experiments on inmates. So there is not a direct link to Charles Manson having been involved with mind control experiments in the MK Ultra program, but there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. Tom O'Neill is the biographer who, oh my gosh, his research on this is unbelievable. But he wrote the book Chaos, which gets into the link between Charles Manson and MK Ultra. And he's done a ton of interviews. He was on Joe Rogan, for example. You can just get on YouTube if you want to learn more about this and look up any interview with Tom O'Neill to learn more. So Charles Manson was in the federal prison system in the county where Jolly West is doing all of these experiments on inmates. He's released in 1967. His parole officer happens to be working out of a free medical clinic where Charles Manson was going on a weekly basis with all of the women who were in his harem. So he was checking in with his parole officer more frequently than he was even supposed to. He wasn't supposed to see him weekly, but he was going in weekly. And his parole officer was working out of one of these free medical clinics in the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, where what they were doing at the clinic, it was some of this MK Ultra mind control stuff. So we just know that he was in Charles Manson and the women who were involved with him, the women in his cult, the Manson family members. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that suggests he was linked to, he possibly was under the influence of CIA mind control stuff. And he became exactly the kind of candidate that the CIA was trying to create, right? So and why would they have done this? Well, this, like I said, these murders so shocked the consciousness of the country. It was this huge trauma, and it really discredited the hippie movement, the peace, love, and hippie movement. Hippies became really kind of scary. They became scary. They're on drugs. These are not safe people, right? So I'm going to show you, I will briefly show you, I'll briefly show you the chart for the Manson murders. So here's the Manson murders. It's August 8th, 1969. And you can see Jupiter is at 3 of Libra. Uranus is at 1 of Libra. Yeah. Wow. Wow. And still so close to Pluto, the planet of death, and on the south node. And we have, what's Neptune doing now? And Neptune is widely square Mercury, separate by yeah, separate by sign. But anyway, I just wanted to briefly show you. I'm not going to do full analysis on the chart. But again, you know, the story with Charles Manson, it's like, and the Jupiter Uranus conjunction, it's just, we get this extreme crime under Jupiter Uranus. You know, it's kind of relevant if he was involved with MK Ultra. There's more to the story than we were led to believe. So that's my 68, 69 stuff. I do have a little bit more to say about the Jupiter-Uranus synodic cycle, but I will do that in another video. Thanks for hanging with me, you guys. Please share your thoughts, your comments below, and I will look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thanks, you guys.